great to be back up on the stage, and it's great to be joined with Aaron Yogfeld, President and CEO of Generac, which is one of Wisconsin's signature companies. And I was thinking, we talk a little bit about the company as a way of introduction, but I think you're probably the expert on it. So why don't we start with talking a little bit about what is Generac, how many employees do you have in the state, and then talk a little bit, if you would please, about your journey and how you ended up as CEO, because you're born and raised Wisconsinite.
I am. I'm a Wisconsinite, born and raised, which is pretty cool, because listening to the previous dialogue here around retaining people, staying in the state, it's interesting. So Generac, historically we're a manufacturer of backup power products. So if you know us at all, you probably know our generators. You might have one on your home or your business. Generally protect homes and companies during times of outages. Business was started in the late 1950s out in Wales, Wisconsin, so western Waukesha County, in a dairy barn, right, where lots of good things were happening in the late 50s in Wisconsin. Our founder is an engineer, entrepreneur, and had an idea for a more condensed version of the technology of the day. And he turned that into a business, and he turned it into Generac. And today, Generac has grown quite nicely. We're about 9,500 employees today. We'll be $3.7 billion in sales this year. So it's a big company. We're in the middle of a pretty important transition. We're transitioning from that kind of legacy generator manufacturer, kind of Rust Belt company, to an energy technology company. And so we've been doing a lot of acquisitions. We've been investing very heavily in technology. And it's really about the future. It's about solar. It's about battery storage. It's about working with utility companies to try and solve some of these larger challenges around supply and demand. And it's been a pretty incredible journey, and there's a lot of growth opportunity for the company that way. For me personally, as you mentioned, I'm born and raised. I was born in the Milwaukee area. Grew up out in Heartland Arrowhead. Graduate, went to UW-Whitewater, and graduated as an accountant. So I'm a reformed CPA. I was the CFO of the company for a number of years, and had the good fortune of starting my career actually with Deloitte & Touche, right in the Milwaukee office, as an accountant, and worked my way through. Generac was a client, actually, which I think if you talk to most people in public accounting, they end up with their clients. I was no different, ended up as the CFO, helped the founder sell his company back in 2006, and then we took the company public in 2010. So it's been a pretty amazing run and a lot of fun, and I love the state of Wisconsin.
Well, that's what this is all about, talking about the problems that the state has and what are some of the solutions. So I think I already know the answer to this, because you and I have had conversations about the workforce shortage, and we saw earlier today a presentation by Wade Goodsell, the executive director of our foundation, that showed that 86% of Wisconsin business leaders say that they're having trouble hiring. What's the biggest challenge facing Generac today? Is it workforce?
Yeah, it's workforce. So it's not only the availability of the workforce, right? So we just don't have enough people to put into our facilities. We hired over 3,000 people last year, by the way. So, when it comes to hiring people, and that's...
How many again?
3,000.
3,000?
Over 3,000 last year alone. Now that's globally. Here in the state of Wisconsin, it was about 2,000. So we don't have enough people, though, and fighting for talent is just a massive challenge that every day our teams wake up trying to solve for that with creativity and with some of the things that, again, some of the panelists in the previous segment talked about, with flexible work schedules and everything else that we've done. But aside from just raw numbers of talent, there's also the skills gap, right? So when we do find people, oftentimes they don't have the skills that we need, in particular as manufacturing continues to advance and the types of things that we're doing in a manufacturing facility, they're frankly, they're higher skilled than just coming in and trying to bolt something together on an assembly line. Oftentimes we're asking people to do math. Right, and so some of the statistics that are in the published report today are frightening, right? I mean, there's less than 40%
on proficiency.
On proficiency, it's really frightening. So it really is, the workforce is our biggest challenge, and has been for some time. It's not a new challenge. I do think COVID exacerbated that problem, because I think you've got a new cohort of people that decided they wanted to retire early, right? So the workforce participation rate only continued this steady decline that we've been on since the 1990s.
And clearly, and again, the presentation that Wade Goodsell had showed that our labor participation rate, which has traditionally been very high in Wisconsin, usually top 5, we're now top 10, COVID is related to that. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce did a survey of people who aren't working to find out why. And there are many people who are on the sidelines because they're still worried about the pandemic. They're worried about getting sick. So hopefully, as the pandemic does wane, we can solve that problem. But let's talk a little bit. Not only, you hired 3,000 employees, you said about 2,000 in Wisconsin. You're expanding in Wisconsin.
Right.
What are some of the strategies that you're using to try and attract workers? You mentioned flexibility. That's a huge one. All of the data points show that people are, and when I drive around the state, I see help wanted now hiring, and it says flexible hours, no second or third shift, those types of things. What is Generac doing?
Well, and flexibility is huge. That certainly is one area that we focus on in terms of flexible shifts. I think one of the previous panelists was talking about, 2-hour shift, 4-hour shift, 8-hour shift, 10, 12-hour shifts. We have all of those same things. And in one facility in Whitewater, Wisconsin, we have over 14 different work schedules that we're balancing for a single day. So, and that's running an operation 20 hours a day. So, that kind of flexibility, though, is really important to people because, again, you start asking employees, why does this job not work for you if you decide to leave or if you have an occurrence, you can't get to work on time? And invariably, what you get back to is they have other commitments, right? They have a life outside of work, and they have families to take care of, and they have other responsibilities, and the flexibility that they need to do that and still make a living is really critical to them. So flexibility is, I would say, first and foremost. Benefits, that's kind of table stakes today, but definitely having a benefit plan that, I think speaks to what's important to people, which is clearly health benefits are absolutely critical. The cost of healthcare continues to climb for individuals, for businesses like ours. We're self-insured for health benefits. And those things are really important to people. Flexibility within their work schedule, of course, as we talked about, which is part of the benefits components with paid time off and some of the things that you do there. You've got tuition reimbursement. There are people who want to come and work for you, and maybe they don't have the skills that they ultimately want and that we need. We can help them achieve those skills and attain those skills. So we've really been pushing very hard on tuition reimbursement programs, technical colleges, going to 4-year degree programs for people who maybe want to get into engineering or some other discipline. Those have become really important as well. But what it really comes down to is it comes down to economics, right? We've got to have a wage structure that is competitive. And so oftentimes we find when we're really strapped to find people in a particular market, we've got to go up in our wages. So our wages have gone up dramatically over the last 18 months. Our starting wages in our facilities in Wisconsin are now close to $18 an hour. The average wages in most of the facilities are $23 an hour, which, you look back even 5 years ago, and those are 40, 50% higher than they were 4 or 5 years ago. So I think ultimately that is a good thing. We're able to attract talent that we need to continue to grow. But it does put pressure. I think we have the benefit of being a larger business, which probably tips the scales in our favor. I think it's probably more difficult if you're a smaller company to compete with a company like ours on wage scales, and you have to be a lot more creative. But that being said, it does often it comes down to what's that headline wage that you're printing in terms of getting people in the door. And then there's a whole host of things you need to do to keep them once you have them.
So there was a lot of talk about inflation being transitory, but I did a media interview where I said, as it relates to wages, it's not transitory. They're not coming back down. You're adding to the baseline, which means you're adding to your cost structure. How are you absorbing that? And the broader concern is, does that affect U.S. manufacturing global competitiveness?
Yeah, inflation is, I would think for any business out there today, is a headline issue, right? So if you ask me what my second challenge is as a company, it's inflation and dealing with supply chain. And supply chain and inflation right now are tightly intertwined. The reason we're getting a lot of inflation, in particular on the logistics side of things, is because of supply chain challenges and getting materials from point A to point B. For us, inflation, I said this in the spring. I did an interview. We were talking about inflation in an interview I did, and somebody mentioned it was transitory, and because that was the words out of the Federal Reserve's chairman's mouth.
Right.
And, I thought about it for a while, and I said, I with all due respect to the Federal Reserve chairman, I'm not sure the last time he worked in a real business, but by the very nature, the Federal Reserve, it's a policy making group, and so policy by its very nature is reactive, right? So the ship's already sailed, and you're trying to create policies on how you get the ship back. And so to think that inflation is transitory, in particular when you're talking about wages, wages are, the last time that we went backwards on wages,
Right.
it's challenging. You can't really do that. I mean, it's almost a non-starter, right? And so I think on the wage side, that inflation is structural, and it's going to stay where it's at. It may slow down. The rate of growth in wages may slow down. We hope it will at some point. But it's really on the material side, and it's impacting our ability to, we all work in a competitive environment, so we have to be competitive. So in terms of trying to stay competitive, we've got to find other offsets to that. I can't change the cost of steel or the cost of aluminum or the cost of copper. Those things are things that, whatever the spot market says that it is, I might be able to contract for it further out, but at some point, if steel costs are going up, I'm going to pay a higher cost for steel. We use a lot of steel in our business. So the challenge becomes, how do you offset that? You have to look for productivity in the labor side of things. So you look to automation, right? And that solves two things. It can help you with productivity, and it can solve some of these challenges in finding people. If you can move your workforce to a more automated workforce, a more productive workforce. So we look to offset inflation with productivity gains. Beyond that, we're having to pass along a lot of price, which ultimately manifests itself. I think at some point here, demand will be impacted by that. You'll start to see demand destruction at some level. We're not seeing it yet in our business. We're a little bit fortunate that we're probably not as sensitive to some of the price fluctuations out there, because when your power goes out and you need a generator, oftentimes it's not a question of how much it costs, it's a question of if you can get one. So we're a little bit insulated from some of that. But a lot of our other products that we go out to market with, the price that we charge for those products, it not only has to be competitive, but it's got to be, you've got to maintain your value proposition in the eyes of the end consumer. And I worry that we're stretching the boundaries now, today, with all of the inflation that's flowed through, all the price increases that we've put into the market. Just how sustainable is that for the long term?
We've heard so much about the shortage of chips, and we were talking backstage. You put a lot of chips in your product. Talk about that.
Yeah, we do. We use chips like everybody else. I mean, trying even a basic appliance today. You buy a refrigerator or a microwave. You buy a generator. You buy one of our storage devices. Our higher technology devices for solar and storage use a lot of chips. We have over 9 chips in each device. A generator, a couple of chips, but chips are a problem. And chip production is not kept pace with chip demand. And what you have is a situation where manufacturers like us, we get a call, and the supplier says, well, we've got about 2 weeks of supply left. 2 weeks? What am I going to do for the next 2 weeks? You can't just change your product line overnight. So we've had to take a lot of our engineering resources off of new product development and focus them on resourcing to different chips, right? So if one chip goes away, there are a lot of chips do the same type of functionality, whether it's a Wi-Fi chip or it's some kind of a processor. But those chips are integral to the product and how it operates. But you have to do workarounds. So you have to find other chips that are available in the market, and then you have to design those in. You have to qualify them. You have to source them. Oftentimes you're paying more for them than you were paying for your current supply. And it really becomes a situation where you're burning a lot of calories and you're not getting a lot of value out of that, right? So at the end of the day, to the end consumer, they don't know the difference between this product that had this chip and this product that has a different chip. But you spent a lot of time and effort from an engineering perspective or a sourcing perspective getting to that point. So that's unfortunate. I think that's going to take away from some of the new product introduction cycles. It's slowed things down dramatically there. And it's lengthened the lead times on products as well. So where we were delivering products inside of 1 month or 2 months previous to this year, now we're out 6 months on certain products, which is another problem. There's demand destruction not only with price, but if people have to wait too long, a lot of times they'll just kind of opt out and say, I'll come back to the market when the product's available.
Well, I share your frustration on some of the policymakers and their response to inflation. First, it was transitory, which meant temporary.
Right.
Then they said it was a good thing because it showed that the economy was recovering. And then now the latest thing is that don't worry about it because people have more money.
Right.
But wages are up about 3%, and I think inflation's around 6%. So that's a bit callous. I mean, Thomas Sowell's famous line on inflation is that it's the worst tax of all because it's very regressive.
Right.
So I'll put you on the spot, and I'll ask you a question that I get asked all the time when I'm speaking, or sometimes the media when they want to talk inflation. When do you see an end? When do you see an end either to the supply chain challenges that we're experiencing, and when do you see inflation perhaps following suit?
Yeah, I would say that we're starting to see with some of the basic commodity inputs like steel, copper, and aluminum, we've seen moderation in those prices. I mean, it was almost a one-way track upward over the last 12 to 18 months for many of those commodities. And again, as a manufacturer, like most manufacturers, we use a lot of those things. Plastics, the same thing, you know, the inputs, the raw inputs into plastics like petroleum. You've seen the cost of a barrel of oil has gone up. Those inputs, those raw inputs have moderated here in the last 60 days, which I think is perhaps the first sign that we're going to see some moderation in the inflation. They've come down a bit. They haven't come down a lot. They have come down a bit. They've stopped going up. Wages, of course, as we talked, have kind of maintained their higher level. Logistics costs are the one, though, that we look at, and that's a big part of
that transportation.
That transportation cost, right? Inbound to get things from ports or from local supply chain into our factories, all the way to the outbound when we're shipping products to customers. Those logistics costs have really continued their upward climb, and I think it's frightening because the previous panelist was talking about trucking, right? And that we could have structurally a shortage of up to 1 million truck drivers in this country, over the next 10 years. And that's frightening to think about because, that's only going to put pressure on that, on the supply chain in general and on the movement of goods. And sure, we can all hope for the promise of automated vehicles, but I don't know how excited I am.
It's a ways off.
It's a ways off. And I don't know how excited I would be, though, to be on the highway with an 80,000-pound vehicle, without a driver. I don't know if I'm feeling real comfortable about that. That's, maybe I'll be comfortable someday. Maybe I'm too old school, but I think logistics costs are the wild card here. We have to see some moderation there. Container costs from Europe, container costs from Asia continue to rise, and it's really the time as well, the length of time, and that puts a lot of pressure on a business when the length of time to get your goods from point A to point B increases. You actually have to outlay a lot more working capital. Right? And it puts a lot of stress on your finances. It puts a lot of stress on your balance sheet to come up with that working capital, to know that that's an investment in the future. And then perhaps to worry about what might be on the other side of this. If demand is going to soften and you've got all this inventory out there coming at you, could that create some kind of a broader economic malaise that could present even bigger challenges for businesses down the road?
I want to get back to workforce, but just one more thing related to supply chain. You mentioned logistics and inflation. How much is energy having an impact? Because obviously it is expensive. These container ships burn a lot of fuel. Trucks burn a lot of fuel. All of those prices are going up. Plus, you're a manufacturer. Your number one cost is probably still workforce, but probably your number two cost is energy. How much is that playing into this?
Yeah, energy costs are up as well. So, part of the logistics cost going up, of course, is the raw inputs for the fuel to get those goods moved around. But then you talk about locally in our manufacturing facilities and our development facilities. Energy costs have been on a one-way trip here, and they've been going up very steadily over.
They're probably not transitory either.
And they're not transitory either. No, I mean the structural element, and this is kind of core to where our business is transitioning in the world of energy and energy technology. We're actually trying to help utility companies solve for some of these problems, right? So utility companies, whether they be We Energies or any of the other local energy companies, they have their back against the wall, right? They've been told that on the supply side, they need to decarbonize, which we all would agree is a good thing, right? The pace at which we decarbonize, I think, is an important topic to explore. But by decarbonizing, the way they're told to do that is by using renewables, which are great. And the cost of renewables, whether it be solar or wind, has come down nicely and can make it economical. And you combine that with some of the incentives, and it can work. But the problem is it's intermittent. It's not like running a coal plant or running a gas plant or even a nuclear plant. And when you replace those baseload power assets with renewable assets, and you create this kind of intermittency issue, you get reliability problems. Right. And so I would say that it's, yes, the raw cost that we pay for a kilowatt hour of power from We Energies has gone up, but what's also gone up is the cost to ensure that our operations are able to continue on with an interruption, right? So we've had to harden all of our facilities. Now, thankfully, we're a generator manufacturer, so we're probably not paying exactly what other businesses might pay to do that. But a lot of companies are having to solve for that challenge. What happens if the grid goes down in the middle of the day when they're operating a facility, a plant. How much inventory gets spoiled, how much productivity gets lost. They have to protect against that. Outages are on the rise here. So it's not only the raw inputs of the energy cost, but it's also reliability and solving for that challenge.
And how storable is renewable energy? I mean, that's always been a big issue, is that it's not storable.
Right.
You know, you can, the batteries just are not industrial yet for wind and solar. Am I right about that?
It's coming, right? So you have been right. Historically, batteries it's wonderful technology, and it continues to improve. Not only the performance of batteries in terms of the duration and how long they last, the chemistries continue to improve, and the cost continues to improve as well. They're becoming quite a bit more affordable. There's a very nice cost curve there. And in fact, that's a big part of the growth in our business is residential battery storage. So people who want to have a solar array on their rooftop, right? The past model would have been they sell that power directly back to the utility company. Well, they're finding now that the utility company isn't valuing that power at quite the same rate, and so they're not getting compensated to the same level. So they have to store some of that power and self-consume it at a time when it makes more sense. And it's the same challenge on a larger scale when you talk about utility scale solar or wind. I think that over time, battery storage or storage of some type it's absolutely going to be a key ingredient of the energy landscape going forward, but we're not quite there yet. And that is a challenge. And this gets back to the timeline around decarbonization. We all want to get there as quickly as possible. I mean, we all love the planet. We want to leave the planet in a better state than we found it for the next generation and the generation after that. In fact, you and I were talking before, Kurt. I mean, you know, the state of Wisconsin, one of the reasons we live here is because we love the natural beauty of this state, right? And all the things that we do here to recreate and hunting, fishing, you know, hiking, everything we do here is about the natural beauty of the state. Of course we want the environment to be in pristine condition. And of course we want to decarbonize our own operations, and we want to see the utility companies do the same. But it takes time, and we've got to give ourselves a realistic roadmap in which to do that. Otherwise, there are a lot of unintended consequences that can come from that. And I worry that we're seeing the tip of the iceberg with that, with reliability and resiliency. You know, just the fact that we're moving so fast and we're kind of jumping over. We want to get right past natural gas, right? We've totally discarded coal as a potential fuel, which I think we all agree. You know, not only does it, you know, it's probably the most carbon intense form of energy, but natural gas is actually a great way to transition from coal to perhaps renewables, and do it in a less carbon intense format. And we have a lot of it here in this country. So energy independence is another thing we get out of doing that. And unfortunately, we're kind of bypassing that. Natural gas was supposed to be the bridge to a cleaner future. And what happened is that bridge just got a lot shorter, right? So we worry about those things, and we worry about their impact on energy costs, and we worry about their impact on you know, kind of some of the trends that are out there.
You mentioned bridge because that's the term that the president used when he was running for the office. He said that he would use natural gas as a bridge fuel. My fear is that we're burning the bridge before we have a chance to get across it. Let's talk, I want to go back to workforce and specifically automation, because many manufacturers are trying to address the workforce shortage with automation, which causes its own problems. You mentioned you're upscaling the type of individual that you're hiring. You need to make sure that they have proficiency in a variety of different skill sets, including math. Automation obviously is going to require a different skill set entirely. Talk a little bit about how you're automating, and then talk about the pipeline to get the people that you need in STEM. Are you working with your tech ed department in the K-12? Are you working with the technical colleges? What are the best practices you can share?
Yeah, so I would say, and I would imagine most businesses are in the same journey that we're on. We're automating our operations, and again, it's around, you know, the workforce challenges in terms of just raw numbers of getting people in. So we have to make each individual more productive, and to do that, you can use automation to that effect. You can use technology to help you get there. But operating that technology, there's two things. One is the cost of acquiring that technology. It's not free, right? To automate your operations is a pretty significant investment in the future.
Is it coming down a little bit?
It is. It is definitely coming down a bit, but it's still expensive to do on a large scale. What we've found, you know, you've got different degrees of automation in a factory. In our factories, you'll find, you know, people working side by side with robots, right? So we've chosen to automate specific functions, and usually what you're looking for there is functions that are repetitive type functions where they're easier to automate. Maybe functions that you want to be able to automate those anyway, for safety reasons and other things that you get certain injuries that can occur in repetitive type labor functions. But that end-to-end automation, like taking a full production line from start to finish and having only one or two people, physical human beings on the line, and all robotics, we're probably still a step away from that in terms of getting there. It's a much higher investment level, and it's the skill level to do that, right? To design those systems, to operate those systems, to maintain those systems. One of the things that we've found is, as we've brought automation into our facilities, is you not only have to upskill the people on the line to get them comfortable with operating that equipment and make sure that they know how to do it in a manner that protects the equipment, protects them as the worker, but we also have to upskill the maintenance teams and the people who are there to maintain the equipment, who are there to create the interoperability from one robot to the next, the programming that goes into that, right? And if you have a change to your product, right? If you have something that you're building and then your engineering department says, hey, we're going to implement a change here, it's to improve quality, to improve productivity, whatever it is, well, that change, all of a sudden you have to go out to your production line, your automated production line, and you have to make the necessary adjustments there as well. That takes a different skill set than before. We would have just printed out a different set of work instructions, maybe given somebody a different set of tools and trained them on how to do that. Now we have to program robots on how to do that new function, and we have to make them work together seamlessly and keep the line balanced all the way through. So these different challenges that come from automation, they're newer to us as a manufacturer. I think we're learning as we go. We have had to first of all, we had to build kind of an automated group internally, a machine builder group, a manufacturing automation and technology group, we call it, MAT group. And that MAT group is responsible for all of that programming. They're responsible for specifying new equipment, for the interoperability of that, and then ultimately the maintenance schedules that go with that, and then all the things that come with that. It's not been easy. That is probably one of the harder skill sets to find, because a lot of manufacturers are on the same journey. So it's a challenge, and I don't think the universities are cranking out enough people in those areas as well. So it's still amazing to me that we've got more poli-sci majors graduating than we have engineers, and I'm not exactly sure where that goes long term. I guess we have a lot of really smart, deep thinkers when they're serving your cup of Starbucks, but that worries me. We wish that people would focus more on STEM, right? So it starts there. If you're talking about automation, you got to get people who are interested in math, who are interested in engineering, and getting that kind of STEM baseline. That's been a challenge. It gets back to the proficiency scores in math, which are frightening. And you look at that and you see that you see an opportunity there, and at the same time you see a crisis. And I think we've tried, at least at the local level, you're asking us, what do we do? So we engage with the technical community, technical colleges, WCTC in particular, because they're right in our backyard in Waukesha. At the high school level, middle school level, we're trying to get students introduced to careers in manufacturing. A lot of this gets back to what we've talked about for years here at the WMC and in other forums, is that perception of manufacturing.
Right, the stigma.
The stigma, right? The dirty, dumb, and dangerous stigma of manufacturing, and changing that. And it's not just changing it for kids. Somebody mentioned on the last panel, it's changing it for those kids' parents, right? Because as parents, we probably have a bigger influence. We probably are the biggest influence around
what the military does. They don't sell the kid, they sell the parent.
Sell the parent. That's exactly what we have to do as manufacturers. We've got to sell the parents on the fact that this is a sustainable career. And if you were to come out on the manufacturing floor at Generac, or I would imagine Oshkosh Truck, or any other manufacturer here in the state, what you'd see today versus what you might have seen 10 or 20 years ago is remarkably different. I mean, it's a very well-lit, clean, temperature-controlled, high technology environment that is, it's not noisy. It's not, it can be chaotic, but that's like any type of, high growth environment in our world. But it's a very different environment, and getting people to see that, and that's really the only way you can do it.
Right.
So we're part of a group, the Waukesha Business Alliance has a...
They're here today, so you can give them a shout out.
Good plug for those guys. Those guys have done awesome work for the Waukesha County here over basically the last 2 decades that we've been involved with the Waukesha County Business Alliance. But they have Schools to Skills, which is a great program to introduce kind of those middle schoolers and high schoolers to manufacturing. And because what we need them to do is we need them to prod their guidance counselors to say, well, hey, you're telling me I need to go to college, a college track, and I just don't know if I want to sit in a classroom for 4 more years. Maybe there's something else out there for me. And there are a lot of kids that we're graduating today that maybe shouldn't be going to college, right? I mean, you think of the cost of college, the raw cost of, you come out with, again, a poli-sci degree and you've got a 6-figure loan balance out there and you're working at Starbucks, and I'm sure that's not everybody, but it does happen. And that's unfortunate. And instead, you can go out and you can get a career, you can start a career in manufacturing, and you can maybe further that career through technical college. You can further that career through on-the-job training, which we offer a lot of apprenticeship type programs and OJT type of programs that allow people who are interested in a career to flourish in that. I mean, it's my job as an employer to give people an opportunity. What they do with that opportunity is kind of up to them, right? But I have to give them the framework in which to be successful. And so we partner with people first to introduce them to those things, and then it kind of becomes inward facing for us. So once we get them in the door, how do we keep them there? How do we grow them, right? How do we develop people into the next group of leaders in our manufacturing plants or engineers designing products, or the next Aaron Yogfeld, CEO of the company? That's the kind of thing that we have to do as business leaders is come up with the development programs to get people to develop and to grow in their careers and their career choices.
Well, I don't take offense, even though I'm a political science and history major.
I knew I'd offend at least one.
My joke on
Didn't think
that,
it'd be this one, but
my joke on that, by the way, is that for 10 years of doing this job for WMC, traveling around, meeting with business leaders, particularly manufacturers like yourself, I've yet to have one say that we need more political science majors. So I choose not to be offended. The reason I asked about automation is because on the workforce shortage, I hear a lot from policymakers that, well, you're just not paying enough, which isn't true. The wages have definitely gone up. And then the other thing is that robotics will solve the problem.
Right.
So directly answer those two charges.
Well, wages are going up. So I would say to that, and you see that, and that's a common refrain, I think, to the workforce shortage. We'll just pay more. Okay, if you're willing to pay more, the person who says that, if you're willing to pay more for the product or the service, that's the other side of that equation. I would say with robotics, it's one part of the solution, no doubt. I think that can be helpful in solving some of the workforce challenges, but it creates other challenges. It creates other challenges in those skill gaps that exist. And so how do you can't just move the problem from here to here. You haven't solved anything, right? You go back to, in manufacturing, you're always, when there's a problem, you're always getting, what is the root cause of the problem, right? And so you do your fishbone exercises, you do your 5 whys, you do all the exercises you do to root cause a problem. But what you find oftentimes is that if you solve a problem here, sometimes the problem just manifests itself in a different format over here. And so you really haven't solved the problem. And so I would say that robotics, just going out there and saying we want to automate our facilities will solve that problem and make it go away, that's a fallacy. It's only one piece of it. I think we have to have a much more holistic view here. We need more people in the state. I think whatever we do, we can pay more, we can automate, but the raw numbers are the raw numbers. Right. Participation rates are where they're at.
It's a math problem.
It's a math problem. This is absolutely a math problem. It doesn't take a genius, and thankfully, I'm an accountant, but thankfully it works for me. I can make the math work, but we do not have enough people in the state of Wisconsin. Our immigration policies are flawed. We're not bringing enough new people into the state. I think we need to be recruiting for more people. I think we need to do a better job telling our story. The state of Wisconsin, as somebody who's born and raised here and has raised their family here, what a great place, right? And it's such an underserved area when it comes to talking about how wonderful the quality of life is here. And how many of you have hired somebody, brought them in from out of state, and they get here and they stay? They stay for 10 years, they stay for 20 years. They say, we love it here, right? That's, to me, it speaks to itself. The quality of the schools, the quality of what we talked about, the quality of life around, the things we can do out of doors. We get 4 seasons here. That's not for everybody. I understand that. And I really wish one of those seasons wasn't quite as long, but I'll be the first person to admit that. But in the end, I think we need to focus on how do we tell our story better. And with manufacturers in particular, We have an awesome heritage of manufacturing in the state of Wisconsin.
Yes, we do.
Think of all the big blue chip manufacturers that call Wisconsin home. And we're all on this journey to go to the next generation, whether it's Generac going from internal combustion engine-driven gensets to battery storage, or if it's Harley-Davidson going from traditional legacy motorcycles to battery, to electrified motorcycles, or Oshkosh truck. We're all going through the same journey. So we can talk about high technology, but it's happening right here. It's happening in manufacturing today. And we've got to have the right policy environment to get people attracted to this segment. We've got to tell our story better. And it's not for a lack of trying. I think we're trying, but we just have to we've got to have a holistic platform that we're talking about here. And look, you can say what you want to say about the previous administration, but Wisconsin being open for business, it was a statement. At least we kind of understood what it meant, right? And putting billboards at the borders and recruiting and doing the advertising on the L down in Chicago and getting people to think about the state of Wisconsin differently, I think worked. I think that was working. I think we need to do more of that. I think, again, this issue cuts across political lines. It does not matter what your political affiliation is. This is a math problem. And politics has never been good at solving math, in my opinion. So we need businesses to solve the math problem. But we need politics to be behind in a way that helps us do that and tells the story the way we need to tell it.
You covered a lot of things there, and this shouldn't be a partisan issue at all.
No.
From our perspective, we try to remind policymakers that, look, fewer people mean fewer taxpayers, which means you'll have less money for the priorities that you have.
Seems simple.
You mentioned immigration, and the report doesn't really talk about immigration because it's a federal issue, but without question, that has to be part of this equation. We're just not going to be able to lure enough people from neighboring states, because primarily what we're doing is we're talking about drawing people from the Midwest. We're probably not going to draw a lot of people from California or Florida for a variety of different reasons. We've studied those types of trends and migration patterns. People just don't tend to gravitate towards the Midwest. Immigration absolutely has to be part of the solution, and we've talked about that in other forums. We don't have that much more time, but I want, as a born and raised Wisconsinite who's had their career here, runs a major Wisconsin corporation, what's the advantage of operating in Wisconsin from your perspective?
I think the work ethic, it starts there, right? As Wisconsinites, you have that Midwestern work ethic. I think there's no substitution for that. I think it's no coincidence. Our company started out in a dairy barn in Waukesha County. I think that agricultural kind of background that a lot of our...
Was Kern a farmer prior?
No, he was not. He's from Iowa, actually.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm sure he's got some farming in his background. My own family, the Yogfeld family, we're from Fond du Lac originally, and that's a dairy farm, kind of operation. And that work ethic, I think that you get from that type of experience is second to none. I think it's carried over generationally. And I think that's really one of the critical things we really love about being here in the state of Wisconsin is work ethic first. I think just the general kind of Midwestern culture, though, people I think are willing to work on problems together historically. I think we've tried to solve problems, again, not to turn into a political discussion, but trying to work together across political lines. That's probably been the most disturbing thing to see here over the last 5 to 10 years, is just kind of the breakdown there in trying to find balance on issues that are important across, as we said, these are not kind of partisan issues. They shouldn't be partisan issues.
They shouldn't be partisan.
They've turned them into partisan issues, even things like the pandemic, which is kind of ridiculous to me. But those are the kinds of things that we have to get back to. How do we find common ground, and how do we have the kind of discussion, the hard discussions to have to solve some of these problems? And we can't do that if we constantly turn everything into a partisan issue. So we've got to work on that, and I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. It's a really challenging thing to do. I just know that it's become such a situation that you can't even voice your own opinion on something anymore without somebody else who has a differing opinion saying, "Well, you're wrong, I'm right." There's like the middle ground is evaporated. So how are we supposed to have any kind of constructive discourse if we can't have a constructive conversation? And that's concerning.
So we'll close with this. What would be the advice to policymakers at the state level primarily, because again, we're a state level organization. We control our own destiny here in Madison, at least ostensibly. Washington's a whole different issue. We talked about immigration. What would you recommend that policymakers in Madison do to make your business and other businesses more competitive globally? Because of course you're operating globally. It's not just here in the United States or in Wisconsin. Is it workforce? Is it tax? Is it regulation? What would you recommend?
I'll call it a platform, and I think it's all of those things, right? So it starts with workforce. I think the current administration here has an opportunity to own that in terms of let's create the next generation workforce for manufacturing or for the state of Wisconsin. Let's do that. I think, again, we all want to do that and we all need to do that. This is a numbers problem. This is not a political issue. It's not, and I think I would say alongside of that manufacturing and manufacturers can be a part of the solution, not part of the problem. Let's not demonize manufacturing, right? And again, I think
some do.
And some do. And I think we're too quick to say, well, manufacturing, that's dirty, right? They pick one of the D's.
Or polluting.
Or polluting, right? And again, we all live in the state of Wisconsin because we love the quality of life here, and we want nothing more than to find, lower polluting type of operations and have lower polluting operations in our own buildings and for our own people. And so we're working on that. And yes, you have to have a regulatory framework around that not only penalizes those that don't do it, but incentivizes those that want to go faster. And so I think that's part of the framework. I think tax policy is another part of the framework. I do think that, in Wisconsin, there was a stat in the publication, and when you talk about sales tax, in the Midwestern states, we're the lowest.
We're the lowest.
That's awesome. You go across the border and you do any kind of shopping over in Illinois, and you're going to pay a lot more for some basic things. So I think we have some good things. We have some great things going for us. Our heritage, our work ethic, I think the position that we're in, the position of strength that we're in terms of those things, we need to parlay that into future success, and we need to do that together. And so let's build the workforce for the future together. And how do we do that? And it starts with policymakers. Policymakers have to create a platform around that enables and incentivizes companies and whole industries to do that.
Well, I love the way you put it. Let's create the workforce of the future in the state of Wisconsin. That's what this conference is all about. You articulated it very, very well. Aaron Yogfeld, President CEO of Generac, thank you so much for your time and your insights. I really appreciate your candor. Very much appreciate you being here.
Great, thank you for having me.